pace even faster that it is growing now. You are invited
It is unlikely that
also I would like is together have sent a letter to and sir, please accept my respect and appreciation for that. That's really that's really a participant of this forum, this meeting every Thursday. And sir, please accept my respect and appreciation for that. That's really, and that's why agencies together is a regular participant of this so much, starting from our board chair, um, Dr. Vardhan is a regular participant of this forum, that this
Very good morning, afternoon, evening, Excellency. With the same time, we have to underline that there are three critical elements for the success and to have a successful end game. One is finance. Of course, there is growing commitment now. The G20 was one good example last week. And second is political commitment. The technical. Very good. Very good morning, afternoon, evening, Excellency. Very good morning, afternoon, evening, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, and friends. Welcome to today's information session on COVID-19. I now have the honour to pass the floor to our Director General, Dr. Tedros, for his opening remarks. DG, you have the floor. Very good morning, afternoon, evening, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, and friends. Welcome to today's information session on COVID-19. I now have the honour to pass the floor to our Director General, Dr. Tedros, for his opening remarks. DG, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. Honourable Ministers, Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, thank you for joining us for today's briefing. We will be keeping it quite focused today, as we will try to do in briefings going forward. Of course, we would appreciate hearing your suggestions about how we can make these briefings most useful for you. Please let us know of any requests or ideas for improving the format. We will start today by picking up where we left off last week with a presentation about the exciting new breakthroughs in the search for a COVID-19 vaccine. Dr. Kate O'Brien, the Director of the Department of Immunizations, Vaccines and Biologicals, and our Chief Scientist, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, will provide an update on preliminary results from phase 3 clinical trials of several COVID-19 vaccines. They will also discuss challenges and solutions for delivering vaccines and WHO support for country readiness. I would like to underline the importance of data and information sharing by member states on country readiness to support you for the unprecedented scale of preparation needed for vaccine introduction. We and our core partners must work together seamlessly so that we can provide our full support for an efficient and timely rollout. We need to know what is needed for which country and when. Today, you will also hear from Dr. Maria Angela Simao, the Assistant Director General of the Division of Access to Medicines and Health Products. She will lay out the approach WHO developed with agencies in the therapeutics pillar of the ACT Accelerator to decide which treatments require an allocation mechanism because of scarce supply, such as monoclonal antibodies. Thank you all for your continued solidarity in the response to COVID-19. As always, there will be time for your questions, and we look forward to receiving your suggestions, inputs, and guidance. I thank you.
Thank you very much, DG. And as DG just announced, we can now move to the first presentation, an update on the COVID-19 vaccine efficacy results. Firstly, it's my honour to give the floor to Dr. Kate O'Brien, Director, Immunisation, Vaccines and Biologicals. Kate, you have the floor, please.
Thanks so much. Soumya, I'll just ask if you want to make a couple of opening comments and then we'll go into the results.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate. And greetings, Your Excellencies. As the Director General just mentioned, what we would like to do today is to provide you an update on where we are with the vaccine development. I think everyone has been very encouraged to hear the news over the last couple of weeks from some of the vaccine development programs. But we also have to keep in mind that these are preliminary results. We haven't seen the full data from any of these trials, and that we are expecting to see the data from many more vaccine candidates that are in trials. and would like to underline that it's important that countries and developers continue these trials and not give up, because we certainly need many more safe and effective vaccines to serve different populations and different needs. As we will see, each of these vaccines have some advantages and disadvantages, and therefore it would be really good to have a portfolio of vaccines which are safe and effective and affordable and easy to deliver, to choose from. So we will provide you an update on what's in development, what results are available now, preliminary results, what the regulatory pathways and timelines look like for some of these candidates. And here we work closely with Dr. Mary Angela Samao's group, as well as with the regulators from around the world. Of course, the COVAX facility is making all efforts to secure doses, to fulfill our goal to be able to deliver 2 billion doses of the vaccine by the end of 2021. But over the next few months, it will be possible perhaps to be able to access limited supplies of doses and hopefully be able to distribute them around the world to target those high priority populations that really need to be protected early on in this in 2021. And then we will not be able to cover the entire area of the vaccines today, and we will bring another update to you next week on where we are with the facility itself, with acquiring the doses, doing the deals, as well as some updates on elements of work that need to be done in country, and come with some solutions, hopefully, for those of you who might have further questions. But I'm going to turn it over to Kate O'Brien now to take us through a brief presentation, and then we're very happy to take questions. Thank you. Over to you, Kate.
Oh, thanks so much. So if we could go to the next slide. So that was a great introduction for this first slide. Colleagues, this shows a large number of vaccine candidates according to different technology platforms and according to the phase of development of those vaccines. And you'll know and remember that phase 3 trials, which are shown on the far right-hand side, are those trials that actually test vaccines about whether they can prevent against disease. There are 4 vaccines that are shown in blue that have reported on phase 3 clinical trial disease endpoints. And we do expect more of these trials to report out soon. I'm going to go to the next slide, and we're going to go through some of the key results from these 4 trials over the past 3 weeks. So the first one is the Pfizer vaccine, the second is the Moderna vaccine, the third, the AstraZeneca vaccine, and the fourth is the Gamaleya vaccine. There are 2 mRNA vaccines and 2 viral vector vaccines. I'll direct your attention to the third line, which says efficacy. And you can see across the row here that all of these products have met the minimum criteria for efficacy that was laid out in the target product profile, which is a minimum of a 50% efficacy. And some of these have reported very high efficacy, over 90%. In the AstraZeneca trial, there are in fact 2 different dosing schedules that were in that trial. One that reported higher efficacy than the other. And that is a preliminary result, as in fact, all of these results, except for the Pfizer result, are preliminary results. I'll also draw your attention closer to the bottom of the slide where it says severe cases. And of course, the whole intent of the vaccines is really in the initial phase to prevent severe disease and death. And for those trials that reported on severe cases, the Pfizer and the Moderna trial and the AstraZeneca trial, there was extremely high performance of the vaccines against severe cases. I also want to highlight the second to last row, which is the amount of follow-up time. All of these results are really short-term results. These are measuring the impact of the vaccines over the couple of months since people have received the vaccine. And of course, what we're interested in is vaccines that have a prolonged period of protection. And all those data will only accrue as people in the trials are followed up. And finally, on this slide, on the very bottom row, there is nothing that is being reported through these press releases about any significant concerns around safety issues. And all of the information on this slide comes from publicly available press releases. Next slide, please. Just continuing with a little bit more about zooming in on these products and the regulatory pathway. The Pfizer product is a product that requires what's called an ultra cold chain. It needs to be kept between -60 and -80 degrees until the point of use. The Moderna product requires freezing at -20, but can be kept in a refrigerator for 30 days. And you see the AstraZeneca and the Gamaleya products are refrigerator temperatures for those vaccines. So a big, some difference depending on what kind of product it is, what sort of cold chain. And then finally, near the bottom, we did provide you target production numbers for 2021 in terms of the number of doses that are being described as will be targets for manufacturing. And finally, on the regulatory review, three of these products are in rolling reviews with stringent regulatory authorities. All of them have WHO regulatory engagement going on with the manufacturers. So that gives you a very quick summary of some very important press release data. And as Dr. Simia mentioned, we are very eager and engaged in looking at the data from each of these trials so that we're going well beyond what's in the press releases. Next slide, please. I just want to move now to country readiness and delivery. There are some really critical actions that need to take place in order for countries to actually use vaccines. We divide these into sort of priority decision-making on policies, regulatory approvals, financing, and indemnification and liability, and technical and operational issues around country readiness, national deployment and vaccination plans, and key bottleneck analyses. In the next couple of slides, I'm going to talk about just the components that are in the red boxes here. And as Dr. Swaminathan said, next week we'll come back with more information around some of the other areas. Next slide. Specifically on the policymaking, there are recommendations from the Strategic Advisory Group of Experts on Immunization, and so WHO recommendations. There are two important recommendations out of SAGE that will help guide countries. One is a values framework for the allocation prioritization of vaccines within country. And the second is a roadmap for prioritizing vaccine use in the context of limited supply. The next thing that SAGE will be coming out with is, now that we are getting vaccine phase 3 clinical trial results, the vaccine-specific recommendations. On the right-hand side, there's information and tools that are being provided for national immunization technical advisory groups that lean on and draw from the SAGE recommendations. And these are available for all NITAGs. Next slide. From a regulatory and safety monitoring perspective, and the coordination and leadership that WHO has been undertaking, on the PQ and EUL side, we have criteria for evaluation of candidate vaccines that has been published. We've issued an expression of interest candidate vaccine in phase 2B and 3 with expected regulatory approval within 3 months. And there are rolling reviews of data from various vaccine candidates that meet these criteria with our partner regulatory authorities. The division that Dr. Simao directs has also provided roadmaps on the assessment pathways and the WHO-led global assessment that involved regional champions. These are followed by the facilitation for global national approvals and active engagement with countries, and these are really critical for going at speed. Thirdly, the issue around labeling of vaccines is extremely important. There is a working position that has been established to facilitate the harmonization and timely global access to candidate vaccines in this very acute period. And fourthly, on safety monitoring, there are global monitoring mechanisms that are coordinated by WHO with regional and country support provided, and guidance and requirements and methods on the highest standards of safety monitoring. Next slide. On country readiness, we have two critical resources for countries. The first is a vaccine readiness tool to assess, it's for use by countries to assess readiness. It has many elements to it, all of the different components of what a country would need to do in order to deliver a vaccine. And I do want to emphasize the importance of having this data available so that as WHO and with our critical key partners who are all shoulder to shoulder supporting countries in this endeavor, having the ability to understand, as the DG introduced, which countries are needing which assistance in which areas is extremely important for us to be as fully supportive as we can. We also now have a guidance on developing national deployment and vaccination plans. And this is the most critical thing of all, is for each country to have a plan around how and when and with what conditions will be deployed. So in the next slide, I'll just give you one more view on that. The guidance for national deployment and vaccination plans has chapters to it. There are 13 chapters that cover all elements of planning, coordination, resource management, vaccine acceptance and uptake and demand, and all components of what it would take to actually deliver a vaccine. And finally, I do want to comment on these ultra cold chain vaccines. In the portfolio of vaccines that are coming through, there are a number of them that require this very cold temperature in order to preserve the vaccine. It does require these non-standard cold chain pieces of equipment and special equipment for handling these deep frozen specimens. So to deliver these ultra cold chain vaccines do have some higher costs associated with them because of the equipment and because of the way in which they are delivered, somewhere between 80 cents and $2 and almost 40 cents per dose, above the costs to deliver a product that could otherwise just be kept in a refrigerated temperature. So this is a consideration in the planning. For the Pfizer vaccine specifically, there are also a couple other issues that do need to be addressed. It's a non-standard vaccine volume for the dosing, so particular syringes will be needed. There is a product that has to be mixed with the vaccine, and a discussion is underway about how to provide that diluent. Special healthcare worker training will be needed, and there are considerations around wastage of the vaccine because of the shelf life of the vaccine. And we're working on all of these to find solutions to them. Next slide. So I'll just finish up, this is my last slide, is really just to prioritize what we would urge as the next steps for countries, for us and for partners, and that is that the country readiness work is absolutely essential to go at a high pace at this point. Country action on these critical bottlenecks and on the use and sharing of data, the support preparation for delivery of all the vaccines with specific attention to the ultra cold chain planning where that is needed. And then for those countries who are AMC 92 countries, the Gavi applications are coming forward. And for those countries that will be submitting World Bank applications for financing, obviously those applications are of high importance and very time relevant. So I'll end there, and I think we have time for questions.
Thank you very much, Kate. Indeed, we do have time for questions, but we're going to take questions after the next presentation. And it's now my pleasure to ask Dr. Mariangela Samaut, Assistant Director General for Access to Medicines and Health Products, for your presentation on an update on access and allocation for COVID-19 therapeutics.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. I'm very happy to come here today and share with you work that's being done in the therapeutics pillar. And it's a work that on the allocation, following up the allocation framework that was already presented to you in the months between May and September, and a final working paper was published beginning of September. On the first interaction we had, we focused on vaccines. So now we are developing the work of allocation for therapeutics together with colleagues at the Global Fund. So just very tell you a little bit on how the therapeutics pillars is organized. Because in the therapeutics pillars, we have the COCOFIN is the therapeutics accelerator and unit, and WHO has the lead on the product allocation. And together with the Global Fund on work stream 3, we are working on procurement and deployment and thinking of the allocation mechanisms being fit very well under the procurement and deployment. So it's co-led by the Global Fund and WHO. Just to say that we are working together, where the basis of the allocation of therapeutics is based on the same principles that we have already agreed and incorporated comments from you in the past months. The principle of solidarity, accountability, transparency, responsiveness to public health needs, equity and fairness, which is a super important area, affordability, collaboration, and regulatory and procurement efficiency. We just heard about the accelerated regulatory pathways that we are working for vaccines, and there are similar processes in regard to the therapeutics. This is a quick recall because this was presented in a different format. We're always designing new slides, trying to make the information easier for you to understand. You recall that we have different types of therapeutics being developed, right? We have more than 1,700 studies, clinical studies running with different types of therapeutics. So we have novel antivirus, we have repurposed drugs, and we have the monoclonal antibodies. And here you see that if you all recall that the only drug that WHO has recommended so far to reduce mortality in severe cases is the dexamethasone. But at the same time, we have other products where the readouts will come up soon. For the repurposed antivirals, we have, for example, the drugs that are used for hepatitis C, sofosbuvir, daclastavir, who are coming out, the interim results, clinical readouts now in December. The same with favipiravir. And they have different indications, likely used in mild, moderate, or severe and critical. But we will focus our discussion today on where we think we will require an allocation mechanism, because we believe that they will be more difficult to scale up with scarce products. So we are talking about novel antivirus and monoclonal antivirus. Oh, I already done that one, the principles. Okay. So we did a lot of thinking, and we would like to share this with you, and you will have time to send us comments like we did in previous occasions. When do we need an allocation mechanism, right? The decision whether we need an allocation mechanism or not is based on the comparison between supply and demand, right? So let's take the monoclonal antibodies. We expect the demand to be high, and we expect that the supply will be low. So classically, this would be a typical product to ensure that there is equitable access across the globe. Second, the novel antivirus, we expect, if we have a safe and effective one, we expect the demand to be very high and supply to be low to moderate. Therefore, we are assessing that we will need an allocation mechanism to make sure that these products reach low and middle income countries. And then you have repurposed therapeutics, where, of course, the demand will be dependent on the product. The supply is likely to be high because they are already existing products, but we'll need to see which are the products that we are talking about once we see the readouts from the clinical trials. But we think if you have a high supply, it's unlikely that we would need to have an allocation mechanism. So the basics. We would assess demand according to two criteria. What's the intended use and what's the setting? The intended use, is it for secondary prophylaxis? Is it to reduce mortality? Or is it to reduce morbidity? In the setting, can you use it at primary healthcare level? Can you only use it secondary and low complexity level? Or are we talking about intensive care units? The type of molecule, is it biological or small molecule? Because that has implications on manufacturing, huge implications. Supply constraints, is it difficult to scale up because of limited number of manufacturers, or it's easy to scale up because there's multiple manufacturing sites? The time in the market, whether it's new or it's repurposed, and IP barriers. Do you have IP barriers or don't you? Like with dexamethasone, there were no IP barriers. But let's take a specific look on the monoclonal antibodies. We see from the studies that are ongoing, and there are two of them that are more advanced, finalized phase 2 and with a probable readouts phase 3 in January. They are not reducing mortality or not to be used for secondary prophylaxis, but they could reduce morbidity if applicable early in the disease. Monoclonal antibodies are injectable, so they would need a secondary or low complexity level of care. It's a biological, it's difficult to scale up. There are very limited numbers of manufacturers right now. It will be new in the market, and there will be IP barriers. So there are lots of uncertainties, lots of hope on the monoclonal antibodies, and these hopes don't only come for COVID. We've been using monoclonal antibodies for treatment of cancer. We even have two biosimilars that were pre-qualified for cancer, trastuzumab and rituximab by WHO in 2019. So, and there is very promising molecules, biotherapeutics coming up for HIV in the future. So they are new medicines with unknown yet safety profiles. We don't have a very established supply chain and other life cycle considerations, and they will require appropriate pharmacovigilance when they come. But they are coming, and they are coming for COVID, and they are coming beyond COVID as well. Then, in the case of the novel antivirus, what do we have right now in terms of demand? We have intended use on the three areas: for secondary prophylaxis, to reduce morbidity and to reduce mortality, depending on the product. It could be used at community or primary healthcare level, and it could be used at secondary and low complexity level. It's a small molecule, likely to be easier to scale up and likely to have multiple manufacturing sites. It's new in the market, so it requires we don't know much about the safety profile, like I mentioned, beyond what's available through the clinical trials. And it's likely that there will be IP barriers to these products. But small molecules are much easier for us to. We're very much used to using small molecules. There are not that many small molecules that are effective against virus, unfortunately. But let's see how this goes. In the last example, why we don't need an allocation mechanism for dexamethasone, right? It's shown to reduce mortality, so demand is quite clear. The setting is secondary low complexity ICU level, intensive care units. It's a small molecule. We had multiple manufacturer sites. It's a repurposed drug, and there are no IP barriers. So as it's reserved to use in severe cases, we don't expect that demand, and it hasn't so far, that demand has surplus the supply. The capacity is good globally for the dexamethasone. So recap on the major elements of the global allocation framework for COVID products that you have seen, and that applies here for the monoclonal antibodies and for the therapeutics in general. What are the overarching goals of the response? Is it to reduce mortality? Is it to reduce morbidity? What is it? The target groups? Which one should be priority groups? And how should specific products be allocated given their characteristics? At what pace will countries receive the products given their vulnerabilities and the dynamic nature of the threat? And we've seen that this is a very dynamic. And what are the boundary conditions, the product characteristics and the country context? As this, you remember that we said that this framework, the elements of the framework are product agnostic, so they apply very well now for the work that we are doing for therapeutics. We're talking about the mechanism for the allocation of therapeutics. And then let's have, this is work in progress. So let's have a look of what would be the elements for the allocation framework for monoclonal antibodies. What we have seen so far is reducing morbidity and preserve healthcare systems. Some of them are showing to reduce time of hospitalizations. They are being used, the target groups, among mild and moderate cases. Among those, risk of progression to severe and critical would be a priority. In mild and moderate cases among frontline healthcare workers to avoid overwhelming the system, in mild and moderate cases among high-risk groups. So it's quite similar to what we have discussed in many ways regarding the vaccine. And the key objectives will depend on the clinical data, the focus, right, the supply constraints, and which will be the focus high-risk populations, right? So, and how would this protect the health system, guarantee that we could avoid disruptions in the health system? So this is the framing that we are working with the monoclonals. And in the timing, allocation will be conducted on an ongoing basis as more supplies become available. First of all, let me say we have 2 products that have been have been given emergency use authorization by the US FDA, but we still don't have the studies finalized. None of these monoclonal antibodies have been finalized phase 3 trials, so we are still waiting for these results to come out. In each cycle of the allocation, we would prioritize countries for allocation based on need and epidemiology and reallocate supply as necessary for following assessment of country demand. In the boundary conditions to be considered, it's an effort to ensure efficacy of the monoclonal allocation. So considerations will be given to regulatory hurdles, health system infrastructure, supply chain capabilities, diagnostics deployment in minimum or maximum thresholds. So where do we stand right now? And then, Fadi, I would like to see if the colleagues from the Global Fund want to add anything. So we have created the treatment allocation, therapeutics allocation team, which includes, it's led by WHO and supported by the Global Fund, but includes other aid partners. We have defined an approach to determine whether the allocation is needed or not. And we began to develop a mechanism for the allocation of monoclonal antibodies. The next steps will be to refine the application of the framework to monoclonals and novel antivirals, and to further develop the mechanism as we know more about which products actually finalize. Like I said, we don't know yet which products will, the profile that once we have the safety and the efficacy data through the opening for the phase 3 trials, the conclusions. So we will send you this presentation. We will very much welcome any feedback by Friday, 4th of December. So you would have 6 working days to do that. We are very much welcome your comments like we did for the vaccines. And we expect to have a new interaction, a working draft to share with you by Friday, 18th of December. And then the next steps will depend on what we see from the trials that will be coming out. Please share any feedbacks, the same email there. So thank you very much. Maybe the colleagues from the Global Fund is Harley Feldman online, if you want to add or comment.
Thank you. Presentation. Nothing to add beyond what you presented, except to thank you and WHO from all of the active partners for just really excellent work and collaboration at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary Angela, and thank you, Harvey, for those kind words. It's now my pleasure to introduce Fabio Longquist, who will act as the moderator again today, and ask that member states, if you have questions or comments on either of the two presentations that you have seen so far this afternoon, to please raise your hands in the Zoom function, and we will, as usual, take a round of questions and comments and then have opportunities for the Secretariat to respond. With that, Fabio, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I should now give the floor to the United States of America, to be followed by Peru. Thank you, and the US, you have the floor.
Thank you, and good afternoon, colleagues. And thank you for this briefing. It's very helpful in understanding just how WHO is thinking about all these questions. And I'm a little bit curious about where Mary Angela was listing the IP barriers. We're just wondering if you can explain a little bit more as to what those are exactly. As we're assuming that there's some underlying assumptions about IP being applied globally as sort of a status quo as it is now. For monoclonal antibodies, for example, where there's limited manufacturing capacity, do you see or predict that there will be dormant factories which are capable of producing the product that are prevented from doing so by IP? It seems that there are many companies who are trying to actively work to prevent that from happening. And so we're curious of just exactly what those IP barriers are. Or is WHO aware of IP barriers that exist now which are preventing production or delivery of COVID-19 products? We'd also welcome hearing about your top infrastructure and supply chain challenges for priority attention by member states and stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you to the United States, and a happy Thanksgiving to you. If I may, with the Chair's permission, suggest that we would take any subsequent questions before coming back to the Secretariat for responses. That being said, I should wish to give the floor to Peru. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I wish first to thank the Director General and the Secretariat for organizing this information session. We very much welcome this focused approach that we believe allows for more time for a discussion. I have two specific questions regarding the update presented on the development of the COVID-19 vaccines. As it has been mentioned over the past 2 weeks, it was made available information regarding promising preliminary efficacy results on several vaccine candidates. In that regard, and thinking in the next steps to be followed to have vaccines equally and fairly distributed, can you please, either Kate or Sumia or Mariangela, can you please elaborate on the options available for vaccine manufacturers to get the regulatory approval for vaccines? Which options are available both at the national level through the national regulatory authorities as well as through WHO, namely the emergency use listing or the pre-qualification, and how these two paths interact with or complement with each other. And second to last question to Mariangela regarding the allocation mechanism for therapeutics. We have seen that in the case of the vaccines, that mechanism has taken the form of the COVAX facility under the vaccine pillar of the ACT accelerator. In that being said, how do you expect that a mechanism for allocation of therapeutics will be implemented in the future once it is finalized? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now to Brazil.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all colleagues. Can you listen to me?
Indeed, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. This is for Kate or Dr. Sumia, maybe. If you could elaborate a bit on this differing data from efficacy of the AstraZeneca vaccine. It's a bit confusing. We have hearing things from the news. If you could provide your own feedback on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now to Cameroon.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Also, thank you for your briefing. Yes, Cameroon has requested WHO to support the country to conduct simulation exercises and interaction reviews. It would be useful to know if WHO would support countries to conduct simulation exercises to test their vaccine deployment and vaccination plans. Cameroon will be grateful for help. Cameroon will be looking for support as with many countries in the African region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cameroon. Thank you to those member states who have raised these questions, the United States of America, Peru, Brazil, and Cameroon. Given I see no further hands raised at this stage, if I may suggest that we would give the floor to the Secretariat, to Dr. Mariangela Simão. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Fadia, and thank you, Sean, for the questions. It's a very good question, actually, on IP barriers and the new products. Right? In the case of the biotherapeutics, we do have two issues. One is the low manufacturing capacity, and what is it that comes first, right? Because these are complex. These are complex molecules. They are not easy to manufacture, and they require technology. But we do have a emerging capacity in many countries, in low and middle income countries, and also in high income countries, for biosimilar production of biologics, and that include monoclonal antibodies. When WHO pre-qualified both trastuzumab and rituximab, we had many applications, and we ended up pre-qualifying two products. One, I believe, even from Korea, Republic of Korea, and I don't recall the other. But this has helped, for example, PAHO to include these biosimilars in their strategic fund and buy on behalf of countries, and brought the price down considerably. So the assumptions are on the monoclonal antibodies is that they are, or some of them are already granted patents in their home countries, on their countries of origin. So there will be a lot of negotiations to be done if we want to increase capacity to produce these biotherapeutics. And here I'd like to say that WHO, together with other partners and Costa Rica, has launched a voluntary pooling and mechanism, which is the CETA, which actually aims to bring in the companies, bring in industry to address and bring sharing knowledge on scientific knowledge as well, but through a voluntary pooling of licensing that will help the world to be able to, once we have a product that's both safe and effective, that we are actually able to provide it at scale in affordable prices. So these are how we are seeing it, and we are seeing that manufacturing capacity is one issue that needs to be tackled, and it is associated also with, if it's a new product and it's protected, how do we manage the licensing of these products to increase capacity globally? On Peru, can I move on to the Peru's question? Because Peru, thank you, Carlos, you had two questions. One on the options for vaccine manufacturers for regulatory approval. Of course, there are, the WHO has issued the expression of interest for the vaccines, for the emergency use listing and and the potential pre-qualification. We do a lot of work, we do on this expression of intent, and we are doing the assessment of the candidates that we already received. We received already many dossiers, and lots of the ones that were mentioned here are already in discussions with WHO and are submitting the dossiers for approval. There you have one side that on the WHO pre-qualification, we do have representations on our experts that help us to do the assessment. We have representations from several countries already, from national regulatory authorities of several countries. We open this up. All countries can apply to be part of the assessment. So this is a very transparent process. On the other hand, so it's very important to get a global mechanism like WHO, it's the WHO pre-qualification emergency use listing of this vaccine, so that it will help to do the international procurement, but it also helps the registration. For example, we have the mechanisms for collaborative registration procedures, and many countries participate in this mechanism. We have in a meeting yesterday and today, and we had more than 400 technical people from practically all countries in the world participating. That's what we call reliance, right? Because WHO, through the work on pre-qualification and emergency use listing, can support the registration procedure. They're facilitating assessments that can be available to support the national regulatory authorities on having a quick entry after a quick market entry after it's approved by WHO or by one of the stringent regulatory authorities. So this is very important because it requires that countries are also willing to participate and willing to apply some flexibilities to the process. For example, we have our Director General just sent a letter to all ministers of health very recently regarding two issues, the liability and identification of vaccines, but also another issue that's related to the labeling of the vaccines, or the vaccine vials and the cartridges where the vaccines come. So this all requires your support to really make sure that there are flexibilities that don't affect safety and efficacy. They don't affect the pharmacovigilance. Still, it's our main purpose when these vaccines get to the market, but that allow you at country level to make sure that there is a timely, the interventions are done in a timely fashion to allow these vaccines or these other products to be available in your country level. The last question from Peru was related to the mechanism for therapeutics. You mentioned quite well, it's not the same model as the COVAX facility because we're talking about different types of products. But we are working with the Global Fund and UNITAID and other partners on some volume guarantee approaches that Gates, actually the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is leading and helping the world through some volume guarantees beforehand so that we can ensure that once a product is finalized phase 3 and is possible to be licensed, that we can have a quantity available to low and middle income countries. And maybe Hardy could speak a little bit more about this question. Thank you.
Thanks, Mariangela. And just for Peru, the question, agree, obviously, there is not the same COVAX facility. However, we do have some experience with diagnostics in terms of collaboration to procure, to properly allocate, and to deliver to countries in line with the global allocation, the COVID diagnostics. And that's been undertaken similarly with WHO's work on the allocation, but also in close partnership with UNICEF, UNITAID, and the Global Fund. So just because there is not a specific facility for it, I think we do have some of the tools in place under WHO leadership and with ACTA to do exactly that, to secure supply for low and middle income countries, to allocate it appropriately as needed, as Mariangela discussed, and then to deliver it to countries. There will, I just note, as Mary Angela also said, be a large amount of country preparatory work required, particularly, I think, for the monoclonal antibodies as relatively new products. But I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary Angela and Harley, for those responses. I understand we have Dr. Stella Chungong online, and Stella, I'd like to give you the floor to respond to the questions around the action review simulation exercise, if I may. Stella, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. With respect to the intra-action reviews, we currently have member states participating in 28 reviews, and about 17 are planned currently. And basically, these are really a platform that allows the countries to bring together all the key stakeholders taking part in the COVID-19 response to discuss the measures that are in place and to correct the course and incorporate the lessons that have been learned during the response and build back into the ongoing response measures. So this has really been critical in helping course correct for member states. And we continue to receive requests for this, and WHO will continue to support member states who then share their experiences. And we encourage that member states should follow up on the recommendations and build this back into their national plans so that they can deal with other ongoing emergencies, but also build longer-term preparedness for emergencies. With respect to the simulation exercises, indeed, it would be important that countries think about testing the procedures and the plans as they roll out the vaccines and the deployment of the vaccines as well as the vaccinations. And WHO stands ready to support countries in putting in place and running and organizing these simulation exercises as they think of and plan to roll out the vaccination for COVID-19. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you very much, Stella, for that response. And now to the final question from the first round from Brazil. I'd like to hand the floor back to Dr. Kate O'Brien. Kate, you have the floor.
Thanks so much, Tim. On the question of the efficacy of that was reported in the press about the AstraZeneca vaccine, we are very eager to see the data in more detail. There are a number of reasons why the differences in the two dosing regimens may have occurred. The differences may or may not be real differences. More data really needs to accrue from that particular trial in order to have a clearer understanding of what exactly is going on in those two arms and those two regimens. So there are some biological hypotheses around what might be going on, and it's possible that there are no real distinctions between the two arms, and as more cases accrue, we'll get a finer and finer refinement on what the efficacy measure is. If I may just address just supplement two other things, which is the Mary Angela's reply about the pathways towards regulatory approval in countries and around the labeling of vaccines. I do want to really emphasize this and on the country readiness. These are the kinds of things that could end up being roadblocks for countries to actually import and use the vaccines. And so we're really emphasizing the importance for all countries to look at your regulatory pathway and understand that there are really three options that you have. One is to just go with your individual regulatory pathway independently and alone. And a second is to rely on a stringent regulatory authority, which might only happen in exceptional cases. And the third is to rely on WHO PQ, either directly or through the regional mechanisms. And so if the intention is for countries to really move at scale and at speed, it's important now to be evaluating what pathway to go on. And this issue around labeling also is also the idea to sort of move forward in a way where every country doesn't need something specific in terms of their labeling, but can rely on the global recommendations about the labeling so that the manufacturers can move quickly on developing and filling, finishing, and preparing the vaccine for shipment to any country that would then have the ability to import it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kate. I understand there are further questions from member states, so I hand the floor back to Fabio to take any further interventions. Over to you, Fabio. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We understand that France would wish to take the floor. Bernard, you have the floor. Thank you.
Oui, bonjour, vous m'entendez bien?
Good afternoon, can you hear me? Yes, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for these two presentations. I had 3 questions for each presentation. On the presentation on vaccines, first, an observation. This work by the WHO is of course essential for member states, and we need these tools, notably vaccination plans. So it is important that these documents be available for member states, and this would help us to understand all the information very quickly. Second, regarding vaccines and their efficiency. So, what about the number of doses which are necessary for each vaccine? And do you have any information about the timing between the 2 dosages of vaccines, for example? On one of the slides, food analysis. What does this mean exactly for Pfizer? And there's another question too. What's happening with the Chinese vaccines? Do you have any information about their efficiency and the status of these vaccines? Finally, the logistics. Regarding the Pfizer vaccine, this requires very low temperatures. So are the other vaccines as efficient for older populations? On one of the slides, there's additional information for the Pfizer vaccine, for example, regarding how diluted it is. Is this vaccine really different to the other vaccines which are candidate options? What about the fridges? Would this also create access problems? Now, as regards care and treatment, on the antivirals, this is also recommended by the WHO for treatment, for treating people who are COVID positive. Then, regarding monoclonal antibodies, do you have any ideas of the prices? Third, what about IP rights? We clearly heard the WHO that it's in favor of what India and South Africa says. One speaker quoted CTAP. So these would be serious possibilities for AIDS and cancer as well. So what's the WHO's position on waiver and the pooling? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, France, and thank you also for making use of the interpretation services. As we see no further hands raised, once again I shall hand back to the chair, who will kindly bring in the Secretariat responses. Thank you, and back to you, Chair.
Thank you to France for a series of questions. I'd like to give the floor to Kate O'Brien in the first instance to respond. Over to you, Kate.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you for the questions on the various efficacy measures. I'll see if I can go through each of them. And one of them I didn't hear clearly, so I may just need to ask for clarification. So thank you for noting the importance of the tools, both on country readiness and the way to the guidance on developing a national deployment and vaccination plan. There are tools for policy development on safety, on regulatory, on demand and confidence. We have a portfolio of tools, and these are being translated into the UN languages, and we'll be providing a compendium of those tools so that countries have a clear idea of all of the different elements that are available for support. So thank you for your support to that. The second is your question around the efficacy of the 4 vaccines that I reviewed the data on. Each of them is a 2-dose regimen. In the portfolio of vaccines that are still coming through clinical trials, there are vaccines that are 1-dose regimens, but none of them have efficacy data on protection against disease yet. So we will be very interested to see those as they come through their clinical trials. Your second question was around the interval between dose 1 and dose 2 for the 2-dose regimens. And depending on the vaccine, it's between 21 and 28 days. So somewhere between 3 and 4 weeks for deployment of the second dose following the first dose. You also asked, and let me just comment that of course is part of the issue around country preparation and readiness is for people who have gotten their first dose to come back and get their second dose. So they are 2-dose regimens. The next question was a question about the Pfizer vaccine. Sorry, it was not quite clear, the specific question, so maybe we'll come back to that. The fourth one was around there are a number of Chinese vaccines that are in development. Some of them are in phase 3 clinical trials. We're very interested and eager to see the efficacy data from the Chinese products and to see the data on what they're able to measure in terms of protection against disease. So we are waiting for the efficacy trial results. And then you had some questions on the logistics, specifically around the ultra cold chain, the minus 60 to minus 80 degrees, and the refrigeration as well. Are these impediments to access? I'd like to indicate that there are no vaccines except for the Merck Ebola vaccine that require a minus 60 to minus 80 degree temperature. So this is new for vaccines, and there are, apart from countries that have been deploying the Ebola vaccine in Africa, there are no countries that have an established ultra cold chain system for deployment of vaccines. So every country is facing this issue. And there may be some ways in which products that require an ultra cold chain may be more suitable for using in certain types of facilities, and other vaccines that require refrigeration may be more suitable for using for broader community deployment. So these are the kinds of decisions, as Dr. Sumia referred to, that we may need multiple vaccines and are likely to need multiple vaccines to suit all of the different needs that we have, that countries have in different settings. The issue around whether there is efficacy in the older populations, thank you for this question. This is of high interest about whether or not the clinical trials have demonstrated the same efficacy among those who are in an older age group compared with those who are not in an older age group. I didn't emphasize that on the slide, but there are some reports in the press releases about efficacy among, let's call them the elderly. And again, we are most interested to see the actual data for each of the vaccines according to the different ages at which the vaccine was given and whether or not they perform similarly in younger and older age groups. And then finally, I did mention that the Pfizer vaccine, as other vaccines, but not the COVID vaccines, does have what's called a diluent, a saline liquid that needs to be mixed with the vaccine vial. This is very common in many vaccines, that we mix two two vials together. So this is not unusual. The question is simply where the provision of the diluent will come from. And that is a discussion with Pfizer about whether or not the manufacturer will be providing the diluent or whether it needs to be procured by the country. So none of these are barriers that are insurmountable. These are just the issues that are in front of us, in front of you as countries, and that we're working all with manufacturers to address them so that these vaccines are as easily deployed as possible in every setting that is possible.
Thank you very much, Kate. And Bernard, please, if there are elements that weren't covered in that response, I'm sure Dr. O'Brien will avail herself to have a discussion with you. Now my pleasure to introduce again Mary Angela to update on the remaining questions there. Thanks, Mary Angela.
And thank you, Bernard, for the questions. I have 2 comments on the vaccines too, because when you're asking about the Chinese vaccines, we do have, like Kate mentioned, 4 out of the 10 vaccines that are in phase 2B or 3. 4 of them are manufacturers originating from China with clinical trials in different places. One is a viral vector and the other 3 are inactivated platforms, which is a platform that's used very much and is very well known across the world. And WHO right now, through the emergency use listing and pre-qualification, is already receiving dossiers from different Chinese manufacturers that are being assessed. I have one comment also on the diluents for the Pfizer vaccine, and was it that there are advanced conversations with Pfizer in terms of the pre-qualification or the emergency use listing of this vaccine, because it's extremely important what Kate was saying. It's very common that a vaccine needs to be diluted, but usually the diluent comes together with the vaccine. And the issue that we are facing right now with Pfizer, it's under negotiation, but it's going quite well, is that the diluent does not come provided with the vaccines. Why is this important? It's important because we need to ensure that whatever is mixed with the vaccine is quality assured, has good origin, that's good manufacturing practice. So not having a diluent that comes from the manufacturer adds complexity in terms of the pharmacovigilance posteriorly, because all these vaccines are submitted, all these manufacturers do have to submit to the national regulatory authorities a plan to monitor safety of these vaccines afterwards. But the discussions with Pfizer have been very positive in this aspect of providing the diluents. On the questions on the antivirals and monoclonals, let me say that first, Bernard, WHO has not recommended any of the antivirals or the monoclonal antibodies yet, because none of the studies have gone far enough for WHO to trigger the guideline process, right? We have the readouts coming up soon. There's more information needed on the readouts. When will the clinical phase 3 trials be finalized, and when we will know for sure we'll have more information on both efficacy and safety of the antivirus and also the monoclonal antibodies and the repurposed drugs. We just had the example of the previously on WHO, the successful one with dexamethasone. We had the hydroxychloroquine not being recommended and remdesivir not being recommended after enough data was available to trigger the guideline process. And let me say that we're working together in WHO to trigger at the same time that there is enough information to trigger the guideline process, that there's also enough information considered to trigger the expression of interest for either the emergency use listing of the product or the pre-qualification. So this is all being taken care of. On the price of monoclonal antibodies, maybe Harley could give some more information on this specific, the ones that are more advanced, which are the Lilly and the Regeneron, because I don't have that information. But From experience, this because of complexities and also because of low capacity to supply in high demand, these products are usually quite expensive in the market, COVID or non-COVID. So maybe Harley can comment on that. On the issues related to IP rights, and let's say that by launching the COVID Technology Access Pool, the CTAP, at the request of Costa Rica, and of May, WHO actually is making a push for a platform. It's a platform that allows for voluntary sharing of information, scientific knowledge, and also the sharing voluntary pooling of patents through using the medicines patent pool, which the Medicines Patent Pool Board has authorized expansion of mandate to include COVID products, vaccine diagnostics and therapeutics. So this is where we are putting a lot of effort. WHO is organizing with the partner organizations a consultation with the private sector early in January. There were already conversations led by Costa Rica with the 40 countries who have co-sponsored the organization of CTAP. In regards to the discussion at the TRIPS Council, we are very much aware that this is an ongoing discussion, has not finished yet. And the position WHO has, this is a TRIPS Council, it's a WTO issue to be taken forward according to the WTO mechanism. But at the same time, we see with a lot of confidence the fact that countries are taking the lead in looking for ways to ensure that equitable access becomes a reality. And it's actually a decision that will be made by countries and not by the WHO. I'll stop here. Maybe Harley, are you still online? Can you talk about the price?
Sure, Mary Angela. I think I saw this morning that some of the work the companies, the Gates Foundation and Unitaid had suggested an initial price of $70 to $80 per dose. That's just what I've seen in the press. There's still, as you noted, a lot of ongoing work, both to figure out ways to expand the supply and any of the intellectual property or other barriers that can be addressed to expand it. As you noted earlier, the big issue is really the production capacity for the monoclonal antibodies. And so there's also a lot of work being done on low-dose studies, which would take our limited supply of monoclonals and see if they can be used in smaller amounts for the same efficacy and impact. And so there is some degree of hope that will both bring down cost or expand the amount of impact we can have for the same cost. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Harley and Mary Angela. I understand that Palestine would like to take the floor. Palestine, you have the floor.
Thank you, team. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I will use the interpretation if we have Arabic, so I will speak in Arabic. شكرا لعرضكم الجد مهم لجميع الدول والمناطق.
Thank you for this excellent presentation. Thank you for all of the information that you provided us.
من دول بتوفير البيانات يجب معرفة مدى
I would encourage member states to provide
بالتواصل مع الجهات المعنية
data. We are going to work with stakeholders in that respect. I just have one question.
لحفظ اللقاحات بدرجات سلبية ناقص
As regards conserving vaccines, storing them at minus 80 degrees. This will be a very important issue. Storing a vaccine at minus 80 is very difficult. Germany is currently producing machines to store vaccines, which are very costly. They're extremely sophisticated machines. So how can we, poor countries, developing countries, commit to storing vaccines in extremely difficult conditions, particularly thinking of Asia, of Africa, of Latin America, as well as other countries. All of this depends on the efficiency of each vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine and other vaccines as well. If the Pfizer vaccine, which requires storage at minus 80 degrees, is the only effective vaccine, how can the WHO guarantee the distribution of this vaccine to developing countries in Africa and Asia and Latin America and to other poor countries? We need to work in partnership with WHO, with UNIDO and other international organizations in order to provide logistical support. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Riyad. I understand also that we have Egypt. Egypt would like to take the floor. I might ask if there are other member states who would also like the floor to please raise your hands now. We have time for one more round of member state interventions, which can then be followed by a secretariat response. So, Egypt, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ben. I hope you can hear me. Actually, I would like to thank all the presenters who gave us some very important information about how the WHO and dealing with the COVID-19. Just my question is with regard to a comment that I've heard that the allocation of vaccines and treatments would be related to some extent to the number of infections or the statistics of infections in the sense that the higher the percentage of infections, the priority of this country towards receiving the vaccines and the treatments. I just want to confirm that my remarks was the moment I heard is right, and I need more clarification on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. If there are no more member state questions or comments, I'd first like to give the floor back to Kate O'Brien and then be followed by my Mary Angela Samauer necessary. So Kate, over to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So let me be a little bit more detailed on the requirements for minus 80 degree or minus 60 degree products. I really want to emphasize that we do have technologies that have been used. There are 6 countries in Africa that have deployed a minus 80 degree vaccine. And the technology we have is, yes, freezers that are able to sustain a low temperature of minus 80 are a specific kind of freezer that's not the everyday freezer that you find, but those are available. Secondly, we have devices that are not freezers that can be used to maintain the vaccine at a very cold temperature at minus 60 or minus 80 for a period of days. And some of them can go on to a period of weeks, so without requiring electricity. And thirdly, so those are referred to, there's one product called an Arctic, and that they can store hundreds to thousands of doses of vaccine. And so those are devices that can be used. They can be put in a truck, they can be deployed and taken out to a facility, clinic to actually immunize. They can be taken out to the field to immunize. And then for the Pfizer vaccine in particular, Pfizer has developed a specific shipping box. And the shipping box stays cold for a period of more than a week. In fact, it can go up to 2 weeks or more. It uses dry ice as the means to keep the vaccine cold. And they've tested, and there is an allowance for how many times in a day you can open the box and still maintain the temperature. And the final point about the Pfizer vaccine is that it is able to stay in a refrigerator for 5 days. So it can come out of the ultra cold chain and be refrigerated in the days prior to use. So there are, I want to really emphasize that there are solutions for delivering the Pfizer vaccine and solutions for any other ultra cold chain vaccine. And we need to recognize that these are available, but they are not in routine use in countries. And so this would be a step that we would all have to take together. And then the final point I want to make on this is that it is unlikely that there is going to be only one vaccine that is going to be used. In fact, that's not going to happen with respect to supply and respect to the pace at which introductions will need to happen. So I think countries do need to be prepared to start thinking about a combination of vaccines. For example, a country may decide if they want to use the Pfizer vaccine that could be used in healthcare facilities where nurses, doctors, and other healthcare providers could be immunized so that there can be freezers in the healthcare facility and we're not having to rely on transporting the vaccine over distances, and to use a different vaccine that can be used at a refrigerated temperature to deploy to clinics and other sites, potentially pharmacies, and other sites in the community where vaccine is being deployed. So I think that as we give you as much information as we possibly can about the nature of the vaccines, this thinking about how might they be used and where would they be used, recognizing also that in 2021, and especially in the earliest part of 2021, we will have limited supply. It will start to ramp up. So it's not as if there's going to be, huge shipments of vaccines that are suddenly going to come in and everybody has to try and figure out how to move these vaccines around. So those are the main points that I wanted to make about ultra cold chain. We do have to solve these problems, but there is technology towards this. And specifically for the Pfizer vaccine, there are these shipper boxes. It does require dry ice, and that's another issue in some countries about where to get dry ice from and how to use the dry ice. I'll turn it over to Mariangela then to address the issue on allocation and are there some sort of epidemiologic criteria for allocation of vaccines and treatments? Over to you, Mariangela.
Thank you, Kate. Just reinforce that the Pfizer vaccine will come into the market with very small quantities, right? And the WHO has not only the vaccines candidates landscape, but we also keep a roadmap for each of the 10 vaccines that are on phase 3. We know where they are and what are the characteristics and when are we expecting the readouts from the clinical trials be done. So I don't think anyone needs to become desperate because the Pfizer is a complicated vaccine, because we are going to have a more than one vaccine in the market, and there will be some of these very advanced vaccine candidates are very friendly in terms of the cold chain. I think this is extremely important because people are getting very stressed out there thinking that they won't be able to provide their population with an ultra cold chain vaccine. So reinforcing what Kate just said. On the allocation, very good question from Egypt, because the two mechanisms are different, right? You will recall that for the allocation of vaccines, we decided to go towards a proportion of the population for 2021, thinking that the nature of the virus is present in all countries, and it's very difficult to know where we will expect a resurgence of cases right now. So we established together with Gavi and CEPI, and the facility that's a Gavi, the COVAX facility that Gavi hosted mechanism. We established that countries could apply for up to 20% of their population to receive vaccines, to pay and to receive vaccines through the facility. So this is what we say, it's an allocation proportion to the population according to availability of vaccines. It's expected for the phase 2 of vaccines allocation, which would happen from 2021, if we still have a scarcity, that we would then take into account threat and vulnerability, and that includes the epidemiology, the burden of disease, and so on. For for example, for the medicines, it's different. It's not a proportion of the population because then it wouldn't make sense, right? In each cycle of the allocation, we would prioritize for allocation based on need and on epidemiology. Right, so that means whether you have many cases or you don't have many cases. Right, so it's completely different for 2021 from the vaccines, where you're going to have access to a proportion of your of your population. And for the specific for the monoclonals, which are in small quantities next year, we would be able to reallocate supply if necessary to other countries, depending again on the need and the disease burden. How is the pandemic? How's the epidemic evolving in that country? They have a number of cases, hospitalization, ICU beds, and so on. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary Angela. And I'd now like to introduce again Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, the Chief Scientist, for some further concluding remarks on this point. Soumya, you have the floor.
Thank you, Tim. I just wanted to very briefly add to what Kate and Mary Angela have said and the concerns that have been expressed by some of the member states about the ultra cold chain requiring vaccines. It is true that the first vaccine that declared its results is the Pfizer one, which does require the minus 70 degrees storage. The next one to come along was Moderna, which is also an mRNA vaccine, but that requires minus 20 degrees storage. And in fact, it's stable at a normal refrigerator for up to a month. And then we had the news from the AstraZeneca vaccine and the Gamaleya vaccine, also interim results, but these two are stable at refrigeration for many months. We do expect other vaccine results to come up, and so in the next few months, I think we will be able to have a basket of options for us to be able to pick and choose based on the country's capacity, on the needs, the requirements, the logistics, etc. What we would like, however, is that as vaccines become available, whichever the company may be, depending on how quickly they scale up manufacturing, that the doses must go to as many countries as possible, particularly to the high-risk groups within each country, which are in most likelihood the health workers have been identified as high risk and deserving of being at the front of the line to receive the vaccines, because we've seen the impact on healthcare workers of this pandemic, and countries cannot afford to lose any more healthcare workers, both to keep the health systems functioning, but also to avoid mortality, preventable mortality among this group. So we would like to see countries being able to take up even the low dose requiring vaccines in limited quantities to vaccinate their high priority groups. And this is what we're trying to do with the COVAX facility. And I understand the COVAX facility is written to member states, particularly those in the AMC 92 countries, asking for your views and options on whether you would like to implement the Pfizer vaccine if it became available for a select group of people. Because it's likely this may start in January. The supplies may start coming in January. But no worries if that's not possible, because I think both Kate and Mary Angela said we are going to have other vaccines. The Moderna vaccine is logistically simpler to use. The public price of that vaccine is significantly higher, but that's under negotiation with the company to try to get the best possible price for COVAX. And then there will be others. So it's really a question of what is feasible and doable and what is each country's prioritization and plan and the ability to wait a few months longer to get the vaccines which may be logistically more easy to deploy. So I think, as Mary Angela has said, I just want to reassure everyone that while we will do everything possible to get the vaccines out to countries as soon as possible, at least to protect those frontline workers, it may not be possible in all countries, both because of limited supplies and because of the logistics. And so then it would mean essentially waiting a few more months for the next set of vaccines to come in. And the COVAX facility will be working closely with all member states, whether it's self-financing or in the AMC group, to do what is best for each country, of course, given what is going to be feasible and what's going to be available. through the facility. But this is something we will try to update you more about at the next member state briefing. Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Soumya. We've just gone past our 2 o'clock timeline. So with that, it's my pleasure now to give the floor to the Director General for some concluding remarks. Over to you, DG.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Tim, and thank you to all colleagues who have responded to the questions raised by our member states. I will just add a bit. One, as you know, when ACT Accelerator was proposed by WHO as an end game for the pandemic, it had 2 objectives. One is accelerating development of products, and second is fair distribution. Of course, when we say end game, we cannot do it with vaccines alone. It's together with the tools we're using at the moment. And with more vaccines now coming, promising vaccines, we can see now a bright light at the end of the very dark tunnel. So the hope is now growing for the end game. But at the same time, we have to underline that there are 3 critical elements for the success and to have a successful end game. One is finance. Of course, there is growing commitment now. The G20 was one good example last week. And second is political commitment. The technical allocation we have been talking about cannot be applied without political commitment and consensus. And there is a growing commitment to consider vaccine especially as global public good. So these are the 2 elements. And the third is preparing countries, as my colleagues said. Because, okay, having vaccines is good, but the goal is to vaccinate. So we have to do everything to vaccinate those who need the vaccine. And we have co-signed a letter with the World Bank, Global Fund, UNICEF, and WHO to advise our country offices to help member states to prepare by identifying the gaps and filling the gaps. Of course, many countries have already started and we're working with them, but we want to accelerate and speed up that process. But we have already many good examples from some countries in terms of preparation for the vaccination. One area is the cold chain, as has been said, especially when you need ultra cold chain. It's difficult, as you rightly said, but it's not impossible. Because we have, as you know, the Ebola vaccine is the same. And even in remote areas like North Kivu and Equatorial Province in the DRC, we have been able to use it. So we have to prepare our system for any eventualities, whether it's for the ultra cold chain or for the others. And that's why agencies together have sent a letter to our country offices to prepare member states. So this is what I would like to add. And again, thank you so much, starting from our board chair. Dr. Harsh Vardhan is a regular participant of this forum, this meeting every Thursday. And sir, please accept my respect and appreciation for that. That's really a very good example for our ministers. And also I would like to thank others who have joined today. And thank you so much. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, DG, and thank you very much, Excellencies and colleagues, for your participation. And we will have the session next Thursday, and again look forward to your active participation.